Hi there, my dear viewer. Today I'm going to be trying out some art supplies from Arteza. They sent me these products for free, but I'm not getting paid to say any of the things I say, and all of the opinions I express are completely my own. A couple of weeks ago I got a really big package in the mail. It was 6.5 kilos. It contained a lot of products I got from Arteza. So in this video I'm going to be trying out their watercolor pad, which has 32 sheets. It is 300 grams and it has a textured and a smooth side. Then I'm going to be trying out their gouache set with 60 colors. It comes packaged like this. The final product that I'm going to be reviewing in this particular video is going to be their watercolor pencil set with 72 colors. I have rearranged the colors because I do that every time. Then in a separate video I'm going to be trying out their oil color set. This one is with 24 different colors. On their acrylic pad paper, which is 400 grams with 16 sheets per pad. As for the way they send out the products, the shipping was really quick. But something to note about their packaging is that a lot of it is packaged in plastic, and also the products themselves have plastic in the packaging. So if that's something you're on the lookout for or trying to avoid, I just wanted to say that. I started out doing a swatch of all the gouache paints and all of the watercolor pencils. This was 132 colors and it did take a long time. I did the gouache color swatch first. I wrote the name underneath all of the swatches and I tried to sort them as I was swatching them in sort of a rainbow order, which ended up actually confusing me a lot. And I repeated some of the colors. I did swatch twice just because the process kind of got bungled up and I missed a couple of colors. Like, it was just confusing. So I did it again, this time in tiny circles, after realizing some things about how some of the products had a packaging that didn't actually match up with the color of the pigment inside of the tube. So that's something to be mindful of, is that not all of them match up with what's actually inside the tube. And I didn't realize this when I sorted it the first time, so I did it again, which was very time consuming and a lot of effort, but I am happy I did it actually. The gouache set has a lot of colors. The only other gouache set I have only has the primary colors and then you mix them yourself, which is supposed to also give you a lot of insight into the practicality of color theory, which is great. But if you're not in the mood to mix all of the different nuances of the rainbow, then 60 colors should cover you. It does have a lot of like pale pastel colors that are difficult to mix into other colors. If you only want like the essentials, get the smaller gouache set. But for me personally, actually what I was thinking as I was doing the swatches was that I think some colors are in this set that I normally wouldn't go for, but that could actually inspire me to kind of open up my color palette of choice and try something new out. I use my own brushes and my own pencils, not from Arteza, if you were wondering. Then they also have in between their different just matte gouache colors. If you don't know, gouache is like, you can dilute them with water, like with watercolor, but they dry matte and also are more opaque than watercolor. So they're sort of an in-between of the effect of acrylics but with the feel of watercolors. Sort of. I'm not an expert. So in between their matte colors they have a series of pearlescent kind of metallic paints, which at first I thought I really wouldn't like. But then I ended up actually kind of loving it and thinking how exciting it would be to include it in something and how fun it would be to work with. So I was actually really pleasantly surprised to work with these. I'm not a paper expert. I like the paper, and I do think that they could develop a bit more brown tones It has, like, you could argue 6 brown tones, but only a burnt umber and a burnt sienna for like dark brown. And then I swatched the watercolor pencils like this, where I first just drew and then I put water on top to see how it reacted with water. Now with these watercolor pencils, they work best if you apply the color first and then water on top. If you apply them to paper that's already wet, it will kind of just push the pigment around. It won't dissolve, in my experience with them. They're kind of hard and they come all sharpened but with a blunt edge, which is sort of strange. I will say I'm not the biggest fan of these. I mean, they're good, but they are being compared to like Prismacolors as like a Prismacolor dupe, and I wouldn't say that. I like my other watercolor pencils and colored pencils better. They're kind of hard. They don't blend that well together in my experience, but they do apply pretty well on top of the gouache. For the piece I did here, I did some sketches first. I had some different ideas in mind. I kind of wanted something contrasting, something colorful with something natural. Something synthetic and something natural would be interesting. My very first notion was to have like a landscape as the basis, and then maybe a cool shoe kind of in front, juxtaposing the different elements, you know. I made like a little color palette of like pink and red and bronze and hot pink. I really like duo drawings or paintings where one is kind of happening inside of the other, so they give each other a context. I was really taken by the hot pink gouache paint. I thought it was so interesting to work with a color that's so intense. I stole the landscape and the sneaker idea and I drew my Gouaches, I don't know how to pronounce that I thrifted like a year ago, and it's probably my favorite pair of sneakers. My concept was to draw a hot pink sketch of a shoe within like a more detailed, flat color landscape portraiture. The contrast between like a two-dimensional sketch in a hot pink against the backdrop of like nature and a lot of green tone. So in the end, I thought I would sketch out my shoe and then paint a landscape in the background using the gouache, and then paint that sneaker sketch in the middle hot pink. I sketched out the shoe, I just put it in front of me, and I didn't sketch it out beforehand, which I really actually think is interesting because you get the dimensions kind of wrong, but it's in a sort of charming way. I ended up not coloring in the sneaker in a hot pink because I thought it would actually be too much noise. I used the watercolor pad, so it was an A4 sized painting, which I'm not used to at all. You can see my sketches are quite small. So that was a bit of a challenge and a bit of a push outside of my comfort zone that I ended up really enjoying. And it was really fun for me to work in a more free, more kind of rough way where I played around with texture, I played around with perspective and dimension a bit more than I usually do. One of the main reasons I really wanted to paint a landscape is that there's so many different tones of green just whenever you look outside. It is probably the shade that we have the most of naturally occurring. So I did mix a few of the colors to be shades of the same color. It's something you have to think about with gouache, is whether you want a thick layer where you almost don't dilute it with water and then it's very uniform, or if you dilute it with water and stretch it out a bit more, it might not be as uniform. So whereas you get a lighter tone when you dilute it, if you mix that paint with a lighter tone, then of course you can also achieve that same kind of effect. It was quite daunting for me to paint such a rough and big piece. The whole bottom part in the sage green was very different from how I usually work. I'm kind of having to lay some groundwork and then work upon that for the rest of the piece. Adding details later is something that I'm pretty bad at. I really like getting straight into the details. So again, this was something that kind of challenged the way I usually work. You can also see that with the sky. I kind of had to do like a thin layer first, and then I built upon that layers and layers upon that instead of doing one thick layer using a lot of the paint. And then the final step was that I added some dimension by drawing different hills in different shades with the watercolor pencils. I did paint and draw this on the smooth side of the paper on the watercolor pad, but since the gouache has like a matte textured finish, it did create a really nice effect when I drew on it with the pencils. And they were also good to work with since they changed color and texture a bit when I applied water to them. So it was actually quite versatile to work with the watercolor pencils on top of the gouache. I recommend that combination actually. So I ended up really liking the final piece. I did a sort of a little flower field. I did some evergreens, and still the most prevalent color is the sage green. This set really takes up a lot of space on my desk because it's so many different colors laid out. So this is the final piece. I think it is really lovely. I'm really proud. It's very different from what I would usually make, which makes me feel very accomplished to try something new out and to kind of grow as an illustrator. And this is something I feel like I would actually hang up somewhere in my apartment, so I might do that if I find a proper frame for it. I painted some clouds in the sky, but I ended up painting them over again because I thought the white of the sneaker needed to stand out. And then my concept was that on the back I would have a neon shoe. I sketched it out again, but from the other direction. And I'm just going to reiterate how interesting I think it is to sketch something out fully without trying to capture the dimensions or the movement of the thing in front of you, and just kind of go at it in a bit of a curious, childlike way. I had a lot of fun painting the hot pink sneaker on the back, kind of trying to layer it without watering down the hot pink effect, which I did think it stood up to that test pretty well. And then I would have the word subtle underneath in neon. And I did that, and I ended up painting, like sketching the letters, painting them over in hot pink, and then carving them out in the black gouache, which I will say I was pleasantly surprised by how far this stretched out, this black gouache. So I ended up not liking the composition. I think for this piece to work, I should have placed the sketch of the sneaker kind of more central and higher up for the text to kind of complement it instead of squashing it. It just ended up looking really tight on the page and kind of like unplanned and not very professional at all. Not something I would want to hang up. I just really wanted to live out the dream of a hot pink sneaker because it was so etched into my mind. So now it's the back side of this, and I think it's a really nice contrast, those two. A detail within this is that the sneaker has a text here where the logo usually is, and it says artificial is authentic. I just thought it was an interesting phrase to put on something artificial within the authentic, you know? So this one doesn't have any text on it. I think it speaks for itself. Overall, with both the gouache and with the watercolors, I would say that they're not the best quality. I mean, honestly, for the price, it's not surprising that they are like a lower quality than the really expensive art supplies that you find in an art supply store. But on the other hand, you do get a lot of bang for your buck. You do get a lot of different colors to try out and experiment with for not a lot of money. This is also just sort of a question of how you work as an artist and how you like your supplies to be. I actually kind of prefer to have cheaper supplies that I'm not as careful with, because if the materials I work with are really precious to me, it really intimidates me and scares me away from using it more openly and freely. So I think it's actually a really interesting challenge to work with something outside of your comfort zone, outside of something you're used to. So the things that I could say are bad about these products are also something I actually found really challenging in a good way, where I feel like I actually tried something completely different with these colors than what I usually do. And I generally really like this. I like when there's sort of a limitation for me, a limited frame to work within. The way I work, that makes me feel even more creative, because I have to work with what I've got. And what I've got in this case is 132 colors, which is actually quite a lot. So, you know. So if you just want to mess around and have a lot of pre-mixed colors and want a nice matte finish with some cool neon colors and pearlescent effect colors and a few sort of odd pastel colors, go for this one. If you want to have like the raw gouache experience of like really high quality, then get like a set where you mix the primary colors. Like, what do you want me to say? And as for the pencils, you can kind of scribble away without feeling guilty with these. And a really cool thing, actually, a really cool thing about Arteza is all of their products have names. It's more accessible because it's less confusing and vague than numbers. And it's also like, for me, it really sparks my imagination and gives me a lot of really, really neat associations. So overall, I think these art supplies are a great tool to kind of expand your horizon, to get a bit out of your comfort zone, to try something new, to play around without feeling like you're wasting precious resources. I had a good experience using this. I made something that I would have never made if I didn't have to make this video. Use my affiliate link if you are interested in buying any of these. And if you're interested in seeing more from me, subscribe. I'm gonna have a video up where I try out their oil colors, which will also be the first time that I try oil paints in general. I'm thinking of doing a self-portrait with them. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed. I sure did, and I'll see you later. Bye! I wore my beret for this. I don't know how to say or style this, but it's artsy, right?